I'd like to begin. I'd like to begin by asking us to go around the screen, introduce ourselves, name, history with the military, and Veterans for Peace member. I'll start. My name is Susan Schnall. I'm currently the president of the New York City chapter of Veterans for Peace, and I was in the United States Navy from 1967 to 1969. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Annette, would you quickly introduce yourself, and we'll more fully introduce our guests later. Thank you.
Annette Brownlee, the chairperson of the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network, coming to you from Jaggaraland in Queensland, Australia.
Welcome. Ellen.
Ellen Davidson, associate member of New York City chapter, and your tech for this evening.
And who makes it possible for us to have our international meeting. So thank you. And Rachel, thank you so much for pulling the program together this evening.
Oh, nothing. Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Rachel Clark. I'm a member of New York chapter Veterans for Peace, and I'm international liaison at this chapter. And also I'm a member of Nuclear Abolition Working Committee of Veterans for Peace, and associate and lifetime member. And great to have everybody here. Thank you so much for made it possible for today's evening event.
Bernadette.
Hi all, I'm Bernadette. My military background is that my father was a Korea soldier for about 47 years, World War II, Korea, you name it, and a short tour to Vietnam. I'm a member of I'm a Victorian member of the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network. Lovely to see you all.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Robin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Taubenfeld. I'm American, originally from Caddo, Kiowa, Comanche country, Dallas, Texas. I live in Mianjin, Brisbane. My father was in the military, actually, in World War II, but I'm with Friends of the Earth and Peace Convergence and various peace networks, and I feel it's a duty to oppose U.S. militarism in my new country that I've migrated to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Margie Beavis.
Hi, I'm Margie Beavis. I'm coming from Melbourne, Australia, Naarm, on Wurundjeri country, and I'm Vice President of the Medical Association for Prevention of War.
Thank you. Welcome. Anne Wright.
Anne Wright from the occupied nation of Hawaii. And I was in the Army way too long, 29 years, and then was a US diplomat, but I finally resigned in 2003 and have been with Veterans for Peace since 2004. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Vince.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vince. Zooming in here from Sydney, Australia. I teach politics and international relations at Macquarie University, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Independent Peaceful Australia Network. Very happy to be with you all.
Thank you. Shirley. Shirley Winton.
Yeah. I'm on the Wurundjeri, I'm on the country, the land of the Wurundjeri people, Kulin Nation. Always will be Aboriginal land. I'm on the National Coordinating Committee of IPAN, Independent Peaceful Australia Network, from Victoria as well.
Thank you. Anthony Donovan.
Hello, it's an honor to be here. I am associate member of the New York City chapter, and how exciting to have everyone from Australia. Wow. But I am born, my father was in the Army and my uncles, and I was born in a military hospital. That's about it. Thank God for the Vietnam veterans against the war who talked me out of joining. So God bless. Thank you. And I
Thank-
belong to everybody.
That's true, Anthony.
Yes, yes.
Nydia, it's wonderful to see you.
Thank you. I'm, I guess, an associate member or camp follower, you might say. I have two brothers, one who served in the South Pacific in the Marines, another one in the Second World War, another in the Korean War. I feel very fortunate in knowing all of you because you're just an amazing group of people. And it's so important. I'm involved with peace and climate, and you're just surrounded by all you saints, basically. You're just beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Nydia. Jerry Hassett.
Jerry Hassett, Army National Guard 63, 64, and Vice President of Chapter 34.
Bob Kyleback.
Bob Kyleback, U.S. Navy, 61 to 65, Chapter 34, New York City, Vets for Peace.
Thank you. Merlin in Seattle.
Hi, my name's Merlin Rainwater, and I'm just a curious attender. I happened upon this email in some random list that I subscribed to, and it sounded interesting. I was raised by a community of war resistors at University Friends meeting in Seattle, and I don't have any direct military.
Welcome. Tom Gogan.
Hi, everybody. Tom Gogan here in Brooklyn, New York, associate member of Chapter 34. Grew up in a family whose dad was very proud of his military service in World War II. And I had to unlearn some things during Vietnam. And here I am.
Jill Godmillo.
Evans. I can't see myself, but that's okay.
We can see you.
Okay. I like this formulation, camp follower. That's what I'd call myself. I'm an associate member. Right now, I'm making a film for high school teachers teaching American history. It's called For High School Students, Notes and Images from the Vietnam War. It's 45 minutes long. They've all been set the Ken Burns 18-hour epic, which I found pretty useless. And after I watched it, I decided I would make something a lot more usable for the high school teachers who have to teach this ungodly war. And so that's what I'm doing with my time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
June.
Hi, I'm June Tano, and I'm a member of Manhattan Project for a nuclear-free world. And I'm very excited to attend this meeting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Zool, I gather you're the Zoom user.
I am. I was a member of the student mobilization against the war in Vietnam as a teenager, and now I'm an associate member of Veterans for Peace, New York City, and I'm a little under the radar today because I'm working the early voting at the polls in New York City.
Got you. Thank you. Glad you could join us. Madison Tang.
Hi, everyone. My name is Madison. I am the campaign coordinator for Code Pink's China campaign to dismantle the propaganda that's leading us to a US-led war with China. And I'm very grateful to Veterans for Peace who partner with Code Pink, which is a woman-led org against war. And happy to be here and happy to join and be in community and listen with everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And Joe Hirsch, I believe you're on.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Hello, everybody. Joe Hirsch, and I'm a member of Chapter 21 in New Jersey. And I was in the Army for 4 years. I studied the Vietnamese language, and I worked at the National Security Agency until my DEROS, leaving the military service. I've been a member of Vets for Peace for about 15 years, and I'm glad to be in this meeting. Thank you.
Welcome. We will begin. Did I miss anybody? I apologize if I did.
How about Eric?
I think you missed Tarek and
Where are you,
Robin
Tarek?
and Margie, the other Margie Pistorius. So
I'm Margie. We say Margie in Australia, not Margie. Margie's American. So we say Margie. I'm Margie, and I'm part of Way to Peace. I was a resistor at Talisman Sabre in 2009, 2011, and 2015. Going into the and disrupting the organising of the exercises, and just learning about US, hegemony and the militarization of Indigenous lands through the use of for military exercises across the whole region. So yeah, and at the moment I'm working against the weapons industry.
Wonderful, welcome. And Tarek.
Hi, I'm Tarek. I'm a veteran member of New York City chapter Veterans for Peace, IN, and also Ireland Veterans for Peace. And I'm so thrilled that you all are here from Australia to join us. So I just want to thank you. It's wonderful. Really appreciate it.
It is wonderful. We'll start this evening the way we usually do, with a moment of silence for the victims of violence all over the world. Those caused by both the United States military abroad and United States police and military departments in this country. Today is Juneteenth, and something that I thought we should recognize before we started with the moment of silence. It's interesting to me that the day's commemoration began in Texas. It's now celebrated annually throughout the United States. And there is increasing official recognition to commemorate the anniversary, the date of June 19th, 1865, announcing General Order Number 3 by the Union Army General Gordon Granger, proclaiming freedom from slavery in Texas. As we know, we have a long way to go to deal with our issues of continuing racism, of problems with the economy, of discrimination in this country and abroad. I just thought that we could take a moment of silence to remember those who have died in violence, as I said, in this country and abroad, and to remember the work that we all need to continue doing, whether it's within our organization as Veterans for Peace, or it's joining throughout the world with people to stop the violence and to create peace. Thank you. We'll have a moment of silence. Thank you all. Tonight, we have very special and wonderful guests from Australia and Hawaii, and we'll be discussing TS-21, the US military exercises. I was going to give a brief introduction, but I'm going to leave the introduction up to our speakers. We'll begin with Annette Brownlee, who is a founding member of the Brisbane-based community peace organization, Just Peace QID, and the chairperson of the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network, IPAN. Annette.
Thank you very much, Susan. And I must say, during that moment of silence, my thoughts went to the 60 girl students in Kabul who were blown apart by the recent bombing and resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan, the shameful war that we've all been involved in. I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today on the land of the Jagera people in Mianjin or Brisbane, land that was never ceded since colonisation. And I welcome the opportunity to meet and build connections with Veterans for Peace, an organisation where the full knowledge of the need to avoid war and to build community consensus that war is not the answer, just as it wasn't the answer in 1950 in Korea, or in 1966 in Vietnam, in 1990 in the first Gulf War, and in 2001 in Afghanistan, and 2003 in Iraq. The voices of the people opposing, particularly the 2003 war in Iraq, were ignored, but people knew and had a full knowledge that this was going to be an absolute catastrophe. Just for your information, the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network was formed in response to the Pacific pivot that we've heard so much about, initiated or announced at least by Obama. And Obama visited Australia in 2011, along with the then Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, signed an agreement to host US Marines in Darwin. This rang bells, alarm bells across the country. And it was that led to the formation of IPAN. We now represent over 50 organisations and many hundreds of individuals that have joined the network. Just last week, the Defence Minister, Peter Dutton, announced he would welcome the expanding the cap of 2,500 Marines in Darwin. And you'll hear more about just what's happening in the Northern Territory of Australia from the other speakers, so I'll leave that to them. So today we're here to talk about the upcoming Talisman Sabre military exercises, which alternate with the RIMPAC exercises in Hawaii, and which acts primarily as a joint US-Australia training for interoperability in warfare. And that matches our interoperability politically and very much economically with the United States. Many people refer to Australia as the next state of the US. Other nations have been invited to participate this year, including New Zealand, Canada, the Republic of Korea, the United Kingdom already sending ships down under, and Japan taking part in this year's exercise, with France, India, and Indonesia serving as observer nations in the bilateral exercise. It's expected to see a participation, according to the website, of 17,000 personnel, but it's very likely to be more than that. In previous exercises, it's been up to 28,000. The so-called War on Terror was the initial justification for the exercises in 2005. However, with the Pacific pivot shift of US military forces to this region, it's very clear, I'm sure it is to everybody here at this meeting, that this is aimed at China. The Australian government's rhetoric, critical of China over the past years, has led to a widespread anxiety about China in the Australian community. Just an anecdotal story. Last week, I went to speak to a minister of religion. I was chatting to the gardener out in he was doing some landscaping. And I said, I'm here to talk about peace with the minister. And he said, oh, yeah, we've got to have peace. You've got to worry about that country, China. So it's been embedded in the psyche of Australians, as it probably has in the US as well, that China isn't a threat to our country. It's a tough one to counter because it's so well strategized, I would say. But you know, China has not indicated any desire to expand their forces into countries of the region, and certainly no intention of invading Australia. Although, you know, you might sort of pick that up from people that you meet in the street. So I'm not going to speak for very long because you're going to hear from some experts from the Australian Peace Movement. And we're all here sharing a vision for a peaceful, genuinely secure future for humanity. And thank you once again to Rachel for initiating this opportunity for us to network.
7 o'clock. So 10 minutes.
Thank you.
I need to be muted.
Dr. Maggie, is it Maggie and not Margie Beavis?
Margie, it doesn't matter.
Margie, thank you. Okay. Melbourne GP, who joined the Medical Association for Prevention of War after recognizing the huge loss of life, health, and environmental devastation caused by warfare. She is currently secretary of the MIPW and co-chair of Australian Management Committee of ICANN. She was fortunate enough to go to Norway for the ICANN Nobel Peace Prize events in 2017. Margie, welcome.
Hi, I'm here with my Medical Association for Prevention of War hat. I'm going to talk very briefly, but just chop the talk into two components. The one is the recurring concerns we have with Talisman Sabre every time it comes around. I mean, the environmental concerns. A lot of these exercises are centered around an area called Shoalwater Bay, which is one of a number of really environmentally very important regions. It's a heritage listed, Commonwealth Heritage listed region. It's got Ramsar wetlands, it's got animals, birds, marine life, some of which are threatened species. And these exercises do nothing to help this area. In 2008, a coal port was proposed here and a rail line, and that was knocked back because it was an area of such environmental significance. And there's also concerns about naval sonar and what effect that has on the large and small marine mammals. The second environmental concern is, of course, the greenhouse impacts. It's no news to any of you that the US military is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter of any entity in the world, and Australian military would be right there in terms of per capita, up there with them, I would think. But they're not disclosing what their fuel use is or what they're actually doing. They do now do environmental reports on the impacts of Talisman Sabre, and I've actually asked for a copy of the 2019 report, but I'm waiting for a reply. On top of the environmental concerns, it's also that climate change is definitely a risk factor in increasing conflict in future. So this is a sort of cycle that feeds on itself. There's also the concern of a nuclear accident with US naval vessels. They neither confirm nor deny whether there's a nuclear reactor on board. So if there was an accident, the risk is small, but the consequences could be catastrophic. And we all know that the reflex response of any government is to sort of reassure the population that everything's fine and under control. Anyway, I hope that doesn't happen. The justification of strengthening the US alliance and strengthening Australia's security, well, we are so embedded in the US military. We have a Major General who's in fact the US Army Pacific Deputy Commander, and there's many Australian personnel going down the chain of command. We are really a close and obedient ally, and really this damages Australia's security. You just have to look at our participation, our willing participation in so many wars, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. What really genuine security would look like would be if we instead spent a lot more energy and time on community housing, on environmental and climate change measures. There's much else we could do with what we're spending on war. The second issue, which I sort of touched in, is the interoperability with the US is not the same as increasing domestic capability to defend ourselves. And in fact, Talisman Sabre models, in my opinion, a scenario where the US establishes bases around the Pacific, encircling China, to use as bases for offensive operations. And there's no real discussion of what this means for the Australian population. And in fact, as Annette touched on, our Defence Minister and a number of other politicians are increasingly sort of talking up what they call the drums of war. And this is really an incredibly cynical manipulation of public opinion. And it's really being done actually for domestic political benefit. There's a number of issues. There's first, it controls the media narrative, which means this government doesn't have to address its failures on climate change, its failures on our First Nations people's deaths in custody, which are appalling, and their incarceration rates indeed as well. It doesn't have to focus on sexual assaults that are happening in our Parliament House, and there's lots of inconvenient issues that they are not dealing with properly. So war is a convenient distraction. It also has the advantage of increasing the prominence of our Defence Department and our Defence Minister. When I say advantage, I mean in inverted commas. It normalises war, and that in turn reduces criticism of Australia's ongoing failures in defence procurement. We haven't really learnt from buying the what one of our news media outlets calls the flying piece of crap, the F-35. But we're now undertaking a submarine project, which is basically an open checkbook that's gone from 36 billion to 50 billion to 80 billion to 89 billion, and we're counting. And that's just to buy the things. And they justify this huge outlay by saying that it will be in service till 2070. Well, that rings incredibly hollow when you think about the rapid advances in drone technology, that really it's more at risk of becoming target practice by 2070 than it's still in service. The fourth advantage for the domestic politics is perceived advantage of this topic over the leading opposition party, the Labor Party. And the fifth is that it suits the weapons lobby and military industrial complex. President Eisenhower warned over a long time ago, well, it's alive and well and thriving in Australia, and is a major issue. And having people like Margie Pistorius and others working on it is really, really important. So I'll just close by saying that I think if we genuinely wanted to make Australia more secure, the answer is not the Talisman Sabre exercises. The answer is increasing our diplomatic capacity and spending on measures like climate change, health, education, and social housing. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Robin Tobenfeld, mother, activist, teacher, media maker, artist, community worker, and a peace and nuclear-free campaigner with Friends of the Earth. As an American, Robin feels a responsibility to challenge US military expansion. As a migrant to Australia, she also aims to support the First Peoples' struggles through her work. Robin.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the previous speakers. I'm coming to you actually at work, at school. I'm sitting in the Indigenous cultural space. I'm on Yagara and Turrbal country of sovereignty never ceded of Mianj in Brisbane. And I'm going to try to share a screen. I know that there's our following speakers are better versed in the geopolitical context than I am. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a brief overview of some of the context as far as on the grounds here in Queensland and the history, very brief. I'm going to do try 4 minutes of activism around opposing militarism, uranium, so the nuclearization and the militarization of this region. So Brisbane is the port, the key port in Queensland, close to New South Wales, but plays a major role in the military complex by hosting US and other war vessels, including nuclear weapons capable and nuclear powered vessels. And we have the airport here, a civilian airport of Brisbane, used for military exercises such as Talisman Sabre and the Air Force Base Amberley close by. Australia has a long history of protesting the war before I came here. So, of course, the Vietnam War saw huge protests. And prior to that, there was a growing movement for land rights, Aboriginal rights, and there was the Vietnam War, women's rights, the Vietnam War, and as Queensland became more repressive, there became a stronger anti-uranium movement, as well as which turned into a movement for civil liberties when the right to protest became or to march became illegal in this state. So in this picture, it's 1977, we see a large gathering of anti-nuclear activists in Brisbane. Over 400 of people were arrested on that day. And this was when it was illegal to march in the streets here. So I wasn't here, but I'm proud to make the connection that the Australian anti-nuclear movement and the peace movements are very linked with each other. And these movements inherently end up being movements for civil liberties as well. My entry into the peace movement here was via the anti-uranium movement. And this is Yvonne Margarula, traditional owner of a land up in Northern Territory, at Jabiluka, opposing the Jabiluka uranium mine, which was stopped, but the Ranger mine is still operating or being phased out there. But this was a major campaign in the Northern Territory where we clearly understand, or for me, it was as a migrant, was clear that the anti-uranium movement and the anti-military movement, the anti-nuclear movement, and the social justice movement go hand in hand. And the movement for land rights here is the struggle for sovereignty is something that all of us in the environment and peace movements need to support and amplify. Since 2005, there have been the Shoalwater Bay military exercises. Exercise Talisman Sabre started in 2005 as a conglomeration of other military exercises. Took place primarily at Shoalwater Bay in central Queensland. Actually, I'll just show you where that is. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that? Can you see my cursor? I'm not sure.
Yes.
All right, so Shoalwater Bay is just north of a town called Rockhampton, which is called the beef capital of Australia, according to the people who live there. And the marketing of these military exercises is really around defense and economy. And we see right now Queensland really pushing to become the cocky state, and also to grow defense industries. And we also see the Australian government pushing for Australia to be a top 10 weapons exporter. So we see increasing normalization of militarization in this country. I have a short video. This was my take. It's 2017, I think it was, where, well, I can play it, see if I can play it. So the Talisman Sabre military exercises take place primarily in central Queensland. They have taken place in the Northern Territory as well. The major exercise point is within the Ramsar listed wetlands, the World Heritage Site, the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. All of the waters of that region are part of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. And The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park goes up the coast from there. So every site, Townsville, northern, as far as Cairns, sees these exercises taking place in World Heritage listed sites on unceded Aboriginal land. But the narrative we see presented in the media, for example, in Rockhampton, was that there's going to be a problem because the new laws regulating troops being able to visit the pubs, and they won't have appropriate ID, and how will they be able to go to the pubs in this town? And so the whole story that's presented to the people here is about the economy, and the problems that are presented are how to facilitate further interaction with US military or military to grow our economies. I don't want to take up too much time. I just want to link this with the broader picture that Talisman Sabre is a facet of US militarism in this region, but one facet, which is belongs, we need to mention Pine Gap, major US spy base in the center of Australia, bases, troops stationed in the Northern Territory, and US access to all Australian military facilities generally and anyway. So this is a little map from Zol de Ishtar on the nuclear colonization in the Pacific. And just to wrap it up, we have been protesting Talisman Sabre since 2005. We have been working to make links with the traditional owners. The sites have expanded, and the information about the exercises has decreased actually towards the for the public. Our biggest protests were in the Howard and the Bush era, and now we're looking for new ways to engage with the people on the ground and throughout the east coast of Australia and the Northern Territory, as well as Perth, where they could swap troops over to grow our national movement as part of the Pacific, situating us in the Pacific. I've spoken a lot, so I'll just end it there. Stop Talisman Sabre. This is in the Rockhampton Army Barracks, just a small group of people protesting, blocking a road for troop access during the military exercises in 2017, I believe.
Thank you, Robin. Our next speaker is Dr. Vince Scapatura, who teaches politics and international relations at Macquarie University. His research interests include Australian and American foreign policies, international relations of the Asia Pacific, and Middle East politics. He is a member of the Independent and Peaceful Australia Network, IPAN, and a supporter of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, ICAN. Vince.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to present today at this wonderful webinar. I'd like to just begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am speaking today, the land of the Daru people, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. That was a fantastic presentation and slide, Robin. My slides are way more boring than that and far less creative, so I apologize to everyone. But I have put together just a few slides so that you just don't have to stare at my face the entire time. I'm going to approach things more from the wider geopolitical perspective. So I'll try and talk just a little bit about what Talisman Sabre is. We've already heard quite a lot about that, but also put Talisman Sabre in the context of larger US-Australia military integration, defense upgrades and investments that Australia is making into significant US bases in Australia, and the kinds of exercises that are generally undertaken at Talisman Sabre, and how they're helping to prepare Australia to play a kind of a niche role within a larger US-led war against China. So I'll try and do that in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So just, I'd like to start off by mentioning that, yes, Talisman Sabre is the largest bilateral military exercise between the Australian Defence Force and the US military, but is by no means the only one. In 2019, which was kind of more of an ordinary year, Australia participated in some 16 bilateral or multilateral military exercises with the United States in the Indo-Pacific region alone. So including in and around Guam, the Philippines, South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, and of course, many exercises in and around Australia. So Australia is very well integrated into the US Indo-Pacific command presence in the region. Usually the Talisman Sabre exercises approach around 35,000 Australian US forces with a number of other observers. They will be reduced somewhat this year as a result of COVID restrictions. Generally, we're burdened with the presence of the Japan-based USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier group as part of Talisman Sabre exercises and accompanying expeditionary strike groups. Generally over 20 surface ships, 200 aircraft, US F-35s, F-22s have participated in the past, B-52 bombers, and so on, and many more. It's not clear if the USS Ronald Reagan will actually participate this year. Last I heard, it was on its way to the Middle East to help supervise the withdrawal from Afghanistan and to replace the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower while it's undergoing repairs. So we'll have to wait and see, but certainly there'll be a huge presence from the US Navy, no doubt. And the US Air Force and the Marines and Army, of course. We already have US Marines present in Australia, which will be participating in the exercises, Marine Rotational Force Darwin, or MRF-D, as it's referred to. I'll speak more about MRF-D and their significance in a moment, but this is effectively the permanent rotation of US Marines, which have been occurring since 2012. They deploy for 6 months every year in the north of Australia. Their full strength is a 2,500 Marine Air Ground Task Force. This year it's expected that they'll reach around 2,200 Marines, I think slightly less because of COVID restrictions. China is probably likely an uninvited observer, is one way to put it. In the past, the last 2 iterations of Talisman Sabre, they've sent a spy ship off the coast of Queensland, one single spy ship to conduct passive electronic surveillance. There's usually a big hoo-ha in the Australian media about this, probably another hoo-ha this year. As Annette mentioned, there's a huge China panic in Australia. It seems very significant to me that Australian media gets into a panic when there's one Chinese spy ship monitoring games that are military exercises directed for war with China, and yet there is zero mention of the literally hundreds of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance missions that are undertaken off China's coast every year by the United States, not just by ships, but by planes and drones and so on. As I mentioned, there's good reason that China would want to be monitoring the military exercises, and that's because although the kind of general objective of the exercises is, improve combat readiness and interoperability, making sure that Australian and US forces can, communicate with one another, have similar operating procedures and so on, so that they can fight together as one unified, seamless force. The specific exercises, at least in the last couple of iterations, have been on high-end warfighting. So not so much humanitarian disaster relief, not even counterinsurgency. That's not the war of the future anymore. That was the war of the past. The war of the future is a high-end warfighting against a near-peer competitor, which means China. There's also been experimentation in the past, and I expect there will be this year as well, with new and experimental operational doctrines being developed by the US Armed Forces, various branches of the US Armed Forces. Multi-domain operations is the one being developed by the US Army. Expeditionary advanced base operations, being developed by the US Marines and US Navy. And these particular doctrines are being stitched together in a new joint warfighting concept that is being developed or coordinated at the moment by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In fact, it's this new military doctrine is supposed to be announced sometime this month. But effectively, these various concepts of the various armed forces, which are being stitched together into this joint warfighting concept, involves penetrating and disintegrating, that's the language used, penetrating and disintegrating China's formidable missile defense system that exists within a few hundred kilometers off its coast. And the idea is to position multiple small, hard to detect and highly maneuverable formations of US forces with very lethal precision long-range missiles all along what's called the first island chain surrounding China, about 500 kilometers off from China's coast. And the Australian military, the ADF, being trained in undertaking these exercises along with the United States. So in Talisman Sabre 2019, for example, the ADF played a lead role in a complex multi-domain operations maneuver. That was a preview, if you like, in miniature of what the US military envisions will be the kind of operation in a future war against China. In other words, Talisman Sabre is fundamentally about training the ADF to play a niche role within a larger US war with China. So to fully appreciate Talisman Sabre and the role it plays in kind of preparing the ADF for a US-led war with China, I think it's important to see the exercises in the wider context of Australian military spending, and in particular, upgrades to defence facilities, which have been announced very recently in order to support what is what is referred to as the US Force Posture Initiatives in Australia. So there are two Force Posture Initiatives in Australia that were signed between the Obama administration and the then Gillard government in 2011. The first is what I mentioned, the Marine Rotational Force Darwin, a 2,500 strong Marine Air Ground Task Force that deploys 6 months every year in the northern part of Australia during the dry season. And the second is what's called the Enhanced Air Cooperation Initiative. So this is an initiative that facilitates the rotation of various US air elements in Northern Australia and training exercises between the US Air Force and the Royal Australian Air Force. So just to take an example, US B-1 bombers as part of the EAC have flown to Australia from Guam, being refueled by Australian airborne fuel tankers as part of the EAC initiative. And those US forces will be participating in Talisman Sabre as well, both of those force posture initiatives. Now, recently, the Australian government announced upgrades to defence infrastructure in Northern Australia that are used by US forces to support both of these initiatives. Just in April this year, the Australian government announced $747 million to upgrade training facilities and weapons ranges to support MRF-D in Northern Australia. And then in February last year, there was $737 million to upgrade Royal Australian Air Base at Tyndall, which is the primary air base that the US forces use as part of the EAC, the Enhanced Air Cooperation Initiative. And these announcements follow Australia's 2020 Defence Strategic Update, kind of similar to the US National Defence Strategy, which promised $575 billion in defence spending over the next 10 years, including an estimated $100 billion in missile purchases over the next 20 years. Long-range missiles, including hypersonic missiles, for which Australia and the US are actually conducting joint research, and is expected they'll be ready to be deployed sometime in the next couple of years, maybe by 2023. The Defence Strategic Update in Australia also indicated the ADF would like to purchase the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, which I've got a picture on the slide there. That's the system at the center of the US Army's MDO warfighting concept, and which was used during Talisman Sabre in 2019. Earlier again this year, the Australian government announced it was going to spend $1 billion to fast track the creation of a local missile manufacturing industry to be ready within the next 3 years. And the idea here is that Australia would slot into the supply chain of American arms suppliers. So we would be using American missile designs, acquiring the intellectual property, manufacturing them in Australia for use by Australia, and then selling back some of those weapons to the United States as part of their military supply chain. And the idea here is to help boost Australia to become one of the global top 10 weapons exporters in the world. That's one of the ambitions that this government has previously announced. Now, the significance of all these upgrades and investments is that they're precisely the kinds of upgrades and investments that various influential Washington-based national security think tanks have been urging Australia to undertake in order to support US forces in a war with China. So the one that I've got on the slide there is one for the Centre for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. It's just one of many examples of defence think tanks in the United States that have been urging Australia to undertake specific investments of the type that I mentioned: land-based precision strike missiles, long-range ISR capabilities, and advocate updates to air bases in Australia's north, precisely because they're outside of the range of most of China's conventional missiles, and it's seen as a very strategic location for the United States to conduct a military operation against China. So the bigger picture that emerges, I think, from all of this is that the Talisman Sabre War Games are ultimately an exercise in further integrating an already very integrated Australia into US future plans for a potential future war on China. It would not obviously be a war in Australia's interest. It wouldn't be a war of Australia's making. And indeed, it would be a total and utter catastrophe with dire regional and global ramifications. Potentially, it could be terminal if it went nuclear. Indeed, as the title of this webinar is, war is not a game, and yet it's precisely this catastrophic war scenario that the so-called military war games, Talisman Sabre, are likely leading Australia into. Okay, I've gone a couple of minutes over time. Apologies. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Our final speaker tonight is somebody we all know and love and work with. Anne, thank you so much for joining us. Anne Wright served 29 years in the U.S. Army, in the U.S. Army Reserves, retired as a colonel. She also served 16 years as a U.S. diplomat, resigned in 2003 from the U.S. government in opposition to the United States war on Iraq. She's visited many military bases all over the world, and thank you again for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, and to all of the chapter 34 and everybody else that's joined in. You all have one of the most dynamic Veterans for Peace chapters that we have. So it's always a pleasure to join with you. And from here in Hawaii, the occupied nation, sovereign nation of Hawaii, where the US has huge military bases, 4 major bases on the island where I live, Oahu, and a huge, huge training ground over on the big island of Hawaii, and a missile test facility on the island of Kauai. And if I may just do a little screen sharing also, I'll put up a small little thing that I've got to show you all. Let's see. I'm still disabled from screen sharing. So
I got you now.
Okay, here we go. Now let's see. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Let's see if this one comes up. Oop, it's out of order. Okay, what I'm going to do is talk about kind of bringing it all together about how much the U.S. has in terms of its militarism all over Asia and the Pacific, and Talisman Sabre is one part of it, but it's pretty big. The whole area of operations of the U.S. military in now what's called the Indo-Pacific Command, because the U.S. military has decided it will go all the way over here to India, and now they call it the Indo-Pacific Command. It's a huge geographic area, the largest area that any of the unified commands of the U.S. military has, with 121 bases in Japan, 83 bases in South Korea, bases in Guam, Hawaii, in Kwajalein, the Marshall Islands, Australia, and maybe I should not just say one base, but it sounds like we have many more bases that one should count in Australia. And then the U.S. has these defense agreements with the Marshall Islands, Micronesia, and Palau, where the U.S. has the defense rights to all the area of the Pacific, that those small islands, but they cover a lot of territory in the Pacific. And when you look at the numbers of people that are involved in this, in the U.S. part of the Indo-Pacific Command has over 375,000 military and civilians, over 200 ships, 1,100 aircraft, 130,000 sailors and civilians, 2 expeditionary forces, an air force, I mean, tons of stuff. Even just Department of the Defense civilians, 38,000 of them. And then we talk about, as Vince and everybody has been talking about, one particular exercise, this Talisman Sabre, where it has been reduced because of COVID down to 17,000 military versus what it normally has, over 30,000 people that are a part of it, and from all of these countries, not only Australia and the US, but Canada, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, France, India, Indonesia. It is a part, as Vince mentioned, as a part of the larger look at what's going on in Asia and in the Western Pacific. The numbers of disputes that have been going on for decades on small islands that are in between China, well, off the coast of China, near Vietnam, Malaysia, all of these disputed areas. And oops, I'll go back one. And in particular, in these areas where we have the Parcel Islands, the Spratly Islands, and then we have, not only are those being disputed, but then the Chinese have started making islands out of small little atolls and putting military runways and ports and things like that, that other nations in the region, and including, of course, the United States, is very, very concerned about. So that's one of the reasons that we continue to have all sorts of maneuvers in the area. I put up here that China has only 2 aircraft carriers, and this is one of their aircraft carriers. This one is an old converted Soviet aircraft carrier that's over 30 years old. China has built 1 new aircraft carrier, but the US has 13. And whether it's the USS Ronald Reagan that has been out there, the USS Carl Vinson that is up here by Hawaii, the US has lots of ships that are being used in what are called freedom of navigation exercises. That's where the US says we will continue to put our warships in between China and some of these other islands to show that these are in international waters and everyone ought to have the right to go through them. Well, the Chinese are saying, okay, fine, and we'll just put our little ships out there also. So it's a very dangerous place where a lot of ships, and now the Brits, Germans, and French have decided they will send, oh, and the Dutch are going to send one. They're going to send all sorts of vessels into the area. So the potential for something going wrong, some accident happening, much less maybe even a purposeful collision, but it is a very difficult time out in that Western Pacific. Even the Australians have put in a couple of their boats. This one is a picture of the HMS Ballast, I believe is the name of it. And it's a part of these South China Sea operations. And it is called the South China Sea and the East China Sea because, of course, it's right next to China. There are new things that are going on, and we talk about uninvited people. Well, the Chinese were uninvited to a couple of things. Well, right now we have the Russians are part of an uninvited team. In fact, right now, things in Hawaii are, the chatter in Hawaii is quite strong because just 400 miles west of Hawaii, there is a small Russian fleet that's sitting out there. And people are wondering what in the world is going on with this. Well, it turns out it is the largest Russian Pacific exercise since the Cold War. They haven't really said how many ships are out there, but they say there are surface vessels. There are all sorts of aircraft. There are anti-submarine aircraft that would be, of course, protecting the vessels. There are Bear bombers that are somehow flying in from someplace. I mean, we do have, and this particular picture is kind of an interesting one. It was taken in 1988, 25 years ago, or is it 35 years ago. You have one of the US missile cruisers, the USS Texas, that was assigned to the aircraft carrier Carl Vinson. This was, in 1988. This Russian intelligence collection ship has been off the coast of Kauai for almost a month now, which has apparently prevented the U.S. from testing one of the missiles that we have at Kauai, part of the Pacific Missile Test Range, and it's probably one of the land-based Aegis missiles. So the Russians have their little ship just outside the territorial waters of the US. US territorial waters go out 12 miles, and they've got that little ship out there at 13 miles. And so no, the testing of this rocket, this missile, has not happened because the Soviets are out there ready to capture all the intelligence from that. But it's very interesting that this, this was in 1988. So here we go in 2021. Here are some pictures from the Russian Ministry of Defense, because the Russians are pretty proud of putting out some vessels out there and some aircraft. So they've put up on their websites pictures of their planes. And this is a picture that came out in today's Honolulu Star Advertiser. It was actually taken in Alaska, where a US F-22 was escorting, well, at that time, probably a Soviet, the Russian Bear bomber. Well, the F-22 fleet from here at Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu 2 days ago, all of a sudden, 3 of them took off very suddenly, and it was a buzz. What's going on? Well, that triggered the US government having to acknowledge that, yes, there is this Soviet group that's outside, just not far, 400 miles from the Hawaiian waters. And here are just some pictures taken over the years of how close these aircraft fly to each other and the potential for problems should a US aircraft run into one of the Soviet ones, or when the US is over near, the Russian ones, when the US is flying near the Russian border, or what's happening more prominently now, when the US sends its aircraft in to counter Chinese aircraft that are actually coming into Taiwan because of what the US has been doing in Taiwan. So it's been quite there's a lot of stuff going on out here. And this is one of the USS Vincent aircraft carrier fleets that's now just on the other side. The Russians are over on the west side of Hawaii, and the USS Carl Vinson and all of its ships have been on the east side doing practice maneuvers. So we've got a lot going on right around here. And if you want to find out more about this, well, all you have to do is go on Twitter, because nothing seems to be secret anymore. The US military is not trying to keep anything secret. It appears just by its Twitter feed. So I'm just going to show you some of the things that the US military is showing the world, and of course to the Chinese and to the Russians, about the mighty US being ready. So here's the Twitter feed for the Indochina Command, or Indo-Pacific Command. And here we've got the Australian ship that's mentioned here in this Twitter feed. Then we've got the USS Ronald Reagan that Vince mentioned just a little while ago, that was actually in the Philippine Sea doing some maneuvers there. Here we have the Ronald Reagan Carrier Air Wing and some of their night operations that were going on just this week, on Monday of this week, night operations. And then you have some of the USS America, USS New Orleans, USS Germantown amphibious operations in the Philippine Sea. Another one, the flight deck of the Ronald Reagan. And here we have dear old Okinawa, where many of us have gone, and Camp Schwab, the place where they are building the new runway out into the Pacific Ocean, tearing up all sorts of marine life and corals. And now they're dumping in to this landfill, or taking from a landfill that they're trying to use to build up this runway that is on very, well, they call it like yogurt foundation land. They're using the landfill from an area where the bones of those that were killed in World War II were placed. So Okinawa continues to be of great importance to us and our challenges, and support for the activism that goes on there. Just to kind of end, to give you an idea of just how many US military exercises there are out in the Pacific and Asian area. Here's page 1, here's page 2, here's page 3, and there were more. These are just the names of various exercises that take place with virtually every country in Asia and the Pacific. There are a huge number of exercises that go on. And to end, I'll just mention, the whole issue of nuclear weapons and the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that Veterans for Peace is working on with its working group on no nukes, and also your chapter in New York that's been very interested in this, our Nuclear Abolition Working Group. And just from the map, you see that we have 4 of the 9 nuclear nations of the world are competing for interests here. We've got Russia that has actually the most nuclear weapons. We have the United States, which I will count in there because we're all over that place. Then we have China and we have North Korea. So it's a place where lots of things are happening, and a lot of countries have these terrible nuclear weapons. And just to kind of end with how many nuclear weapons there are in the world and our commitment to keep working to try to make this a nuclear-free world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you all for joining us. I'd also like to specifically thank Rachel Clark for bringing together the program tonight, for having the idea and the vision of getting us all together and gathering, thank goodness, through Zoom. So welcome everybody, and we'll start with, are there questions, comments from folks at today's meeting? I just would like to ask a quick question about the Australian Defence Forces. Is that all voluntary? Is it formulated the same way as the United States military? Is it voluntary? And if an individual joins the Australian Defence Forces, can they simply resign?
Well, I think we might leave that up to Vince. I mean, very, very briefly, it is a voluntary force, yeah. And there's, I don't know whether it's the same in the US, but there's fairly constant advertising to recruit people to the ADF and its 3 arms. So to me, that indicates there is actually a bit of a problem maintaining their membership. Does Vince or Margie want to comment on that?
No, that's basically right. Yeah, it's a voluntary force. It's not a conscript force. Yes, they are free to resign. Obviously, there are similarities but differences with the US armed forces, the way that it's structured, and of course on a much smaller scale. But they are comparable. Australia, for example, doesn't have a marine force, but our army often undertakes marine-like operations, and it's the US Marines and the Australian Army that are often working with one another on those, for example, amphibious assaults that I had on my slide that were being undertaken in Talisman Sabre.
The spending on defence is rapidly increasing, and now is more than 7% of government spending, and really rapidly accelerating, which is very depressing.
That was actually going to be my next question, is what percent of the government spending goes into military operations and what percent goes into social services, education, healthcare?
So the government at last defence, the 2016 defence paper committed to an ambition of Australia spending 2% of GDP on defence. We're now at that target, and we're looking to exceed it. Even during the COVID pandemic, when the government was announcing cuts to other areas, no cuts were announced to defence spending. In fact, it looks like over the next 10 years, it'll rise to around about 2.2% of GDP if the current funding commitments are kept. So it's one area of the budget that the government is committed to maintaining its funding commitments, irrespective of what's happening in the wider economic context. It's also not linked anymore really to a percentage of GDP, because of course GDP goes up and down depending on what's happening with the economy. So the government in 2016, unlike previous commitments, committed to a particular funding envelope and said we're going to spend this much money irrespective of whether the Australian economy grows or slows or not. And that's kind of why we're reaching 2.2% of GDP, because it's the economy as a result of COVID-19 hasn't grown as fast as expected.
I'd also clarify the difference between the two statistics is that mine's of government expenditure, whereas Vince is of the whole economy. So that, I mean, we really get less than half of the whole economy into our actual government expenditure. And the government likes to frame it in 2% rather than 7%. And it is rising.
I've got a question for you, Susan, and the Veterans of Peace. What we've seen here is a great justification for defence spending in terms of jobs, all the way through the government's language, and to justify and to make this palatable is this will create jobs. Now we've had access to some of the Brown University research, which is really wonderful research being done. I think it's the Watson or Brown University, but just looking at the actual reality of what does produce jobs in terms of funding of manufacturing and general stimulation of the economy. And it's very clear that in fact, a great deal more jobs can be created, particularly in the transition to renewable energy for the future. So, I mean, I'm just interested to what you guys are hearing in terms of your justification for the massive military spending that you are subject to.
I think part of the problem in the United States is that we've gotten used to the defense, quote, defense and military spending. And part of our issues when we go into high schools and colleges and talk with students about the draft and about not going into the military, it's not just jobs. They provide education and healthcare, and for many people, a way out of a very difficult economic situation. Is there anybody else who would like to answer this? Very important discussion for us, both in terms of tonight and in terms of working with the American public.
Susan, I just want to let you know that both Anthony and Rachel have their hands up. You might not see them.
Oh, terrific. Okay, Rachel.
Unmute, Rachel.
Thank you, Annette, for your valuable question. Yes, it is an employment issue, very much deeply intertwined with the military issue. And here in the United States, all 50 states have some kind of assembly, military assembly factories. I think it's purposely scattered, especially in rural areas. They have many, many military assembly factories where they provide local employment opportunities. And the interesting fact is like 80 to 90% of parts of those that being imported to the United States come from Asia, including China. Can you believe it? Including China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, you name it. Okay, so under the umbrella of a United States military budget, there's so many foreign corporations hanging, swarming into this huge chunk of money, which is like a 62% of our discretionary budget. Okay, so although we wield the, we hold very high the big placard of freedom and democracy and capitalism, I think this is pretty much socialism, because, our so much more than half of our discretionary budget goes to military contracts, right? I mean, governmental contracts. For example, Raytheon, those big defense corporations, more than 90% of their income comes from military contracts, governmental contracts, right? So I think we really need to break down this whole, how do you say, amalgamation of real, I don't know how, I can't find any word for this.
Military industrial complex.
Yes, military industrial, congressional, academic, and media complex is, it's very difficult to break down, but I think we should keep raise awareness of the facts across the border of national borders. And I think today I'm very much overwhelmed about by the amount of information from Australian people and right, so many planned, scheduled military exercises, so many of them, and also Great Barrier Reef. They talk about how badly the whole area was broken, but they never ever mentioned about the cause of the destruction, only climate change. But it is not only climate change, the military exercises, right? So I think this is a new information, and that we really need to spread across the globe and spread the coalition of civilian societies, not the governments. They're all, you know, that side of the society, like, how do you call it, 1% or 0.1%, you know, they don't care about us. And I think we should make a bigger coalition across the globe like this. Thank you.
Anthony.
Wow, well, all I can say is thank you for recording this, and thank you for being here. Invaluable. Vince, I wish your presentation was boring. I unfortunately was, my stomach was churning the whole time. So it's not boring, and it's devastating. All this information is devastating. And my question was going to be to our neighbors way south there, was how we can help you. But by your question, you've given me the answer. We need to do all we can, and everyone on this webinar is trying to their best. But as was just mentioned by Rachel, we do have this, media is corporately owned as well, and it's really hard for us to break through to our media about the tremendous cost, the tremendous amount of exercises we do. So I guess in me asking you how we can help you best, you probably will probably just tell us, could you please do something about your military here? We're doing everything we can. When we get into costs, I'd like to just say one thing about what I know, having spent years trying to get at the costs, is that we have a tremendous amount of hidden costs. So the costs that we talk about, even, I mean, the 100 billion that you talked about from missile technology, Vince, over the next 20 years, it's so difficult to hear that. But I know that we have tremendous hidden costs, secret costs that are not even calculated here. So God bless you. And yeah, anything we can do to help you, we're doing all we can here, but it's never quite enough. Thank you.
Sure. And at some point, I'd like us to get back to talking about what Anthony, a group, has been doing from New York City Veterans for Peace, which is a resolution in New York City Council. I feel like we always get overwhelmed when we hear about the enormous set of data and statistics in military operations. But it's so important for us to understand that there are things that we can do by bringing communities together. Could I give you just a couple of minutes to talk about the New York City resolution that we worked on?
Sure. Well, I think many cities in the country, in the US, back in the 80s, we did this, but it came up again recently after the TPNW treaty, that a number of activists here and Veterans for Peace was always part of this. We approached our city council to divest. We focus on nuclear weapons because the TPNW was so refreshing, and just, it's a magical, wonderful thing to have happened. So to divest from our city pension funds, which are quite a lot in New York City, from any nuclear weapon company. We have a bank here, Amalgamated Bank, that has done this and has policies that won't have any transactions or investments in nuclear weapon companies. So this is something we've asked our city council to do, and we had and to support the TPNW, but also to divest. And I think cities can do this everywhere, and many cities are doing it presently. But New York City we're the home of Wall Street, which is the conduit of all the money that we're talking about. It flows through this place about a half a mile from where I live. So we're doing what we can here, and we had a tremendous success. Susan and a lot of people here were at this public hearing, packed house, beautiful public hearing. We have the majority of city council members on board, super majority we had. And then, of course, as Gorbachev said with Reagan, when they came this close to getting rid of nukes and they thought they had it, Gorbachev in his memoirs talks about a secret hand, a secret influence coming in and just not allowing it to happen. And this is what's happening presently with our resolution that has tremendous amount of support. All of a sudden, the speaker, who is fully supportive, is saying, well, you know, we don't really deal with international issues. So we're now redoubling our efforts, trying to convince them that we're not sure if a nuclear holocaust is local or international, but it's probably both.
Do something. Thank you.
Annette. Yeah.
Annette, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I actually think I'd like Margie as someone who's working on that same international campaign, and I might just make the point that the success of the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons has been that what it is an international campaign, but some interesting work being done along similar lines in Australia, Anthony, and Margie might just speak to that.
Yes, we've got over 35 councils, local councils signed on to a resolution urging the Australian government to sign and ratify the treaty. And there's over 400 councils and regional areas in Europe that are pressuring their local governments and then their federal governments to sign and ratify the treaty. So it is a global and a local issue, and it will be the councils that will be left to pick up the pieces when a nuclear event happens. So it has been the urging of New York City Council. We've been watching closely, actually, because I'm also involved with a group called Quit Nukes, which is trying to get Australia's pension funds to not support nuclear weapons. And it's really been very encouraging to see the really terrific work that's being done with New York City to get them out of nuclear weapons. And the councils here in Australia are looking at that. There's Port Phillip, and we're working on other councils to also divest.
Thank you.
Tarek wanted to raise his hand. So,
Can you
Okay.
hear me?
No, we can always
I
hear you.
have a hard time moving over. First of all, I really want to thank you guys tremendously. This has just been so important. And to make this connection, to also have this connection with you all is just vitally important. Everything you said was just riveting. And I also wanted to comment on the military-industrial complex that the United States is. The United States is one large military-industrial complex. It's not a question of one factory in a factory in every state. Almost every county in the United States has some involvement with manufacturing weapons. Okay, so our whole economy is dependent on it. It's a terrible situation. And people still glorify soldiers. They still glorify our so-called warriors. There's a lot of media brainwashing going on. So one thing that I think that we can do and we should do is to focus on breaking through this media propaganda. And you can't do it by appealing to the very corporate media that does it. You may get an article in once in a blue moon, one article or two articles in the New York Times or something like that once in a while. We have to focus on creating more alternative media. This is my feeling. More newspapers that are put out by us, more radio shows, everything, websites, the whole thing. There are many. We need many more in order to break through what we have is a blackout, of real progressive thought. But again, thank you so much. I hope this can be done again, and we will spread the word of this. We will spread this recording around. So that's it.
Are there other questions? Go ahead, Annette.
Oh yeah, I know that we're getting close to the end of the webinar, and I just wanted to, well, I suppose share with you a couple of the ways in which activism is sort of being played out here in Australia, and one of which the IPAN has kind of thought things through, and being aware that we're often talking to like-minded people who are as well informed as each of us are, an opportunity to kind of break out of that bubble. We've been running a national inquiry into the costs and consequences of the wars that we've engaged in and the alliance with the United States. So this has been running for the last 8 months. Once we have all the submissions in, and we would welcome submissions from any of you as well. I can share that link with Rachel and Ellen. We primarily have it set up as Australians kind of putting their submissions in around the impact of the wars on ordinary Australians, but we welcome people from outside of Australia, the costs and consequences of Australia's support for the United States. And in fact, we do have quite a lot of power in the sense that were we to buck the requests or the participation with the United States, I think that would have a significant dent in America's sort of self-righteousness about their foreign policy. So I would welcome any submissions from you guys as well. The other sort of important thing that's happened just recently here has been quite a major campaign that Margie Pistorius, who's on this webinar from an organisation called Wage Peace, has run around the weapons manufacturing and exporting and infiltration into those rural areas, just as Anthony was talking about. So we had quite a major protest here, which we'd be very happy to share the reports of that with you. There's been some fabulous videos made demonstrating the extent at which protesters were able to disrupt that major expo with 12,500 people attending a military expo called Land Forces. So I just wanted to share that with you as well.
Thank you. I'm just thinking they're wonderful ideas. We can certainly use some of those techniques at the Army recruiting station in Times Square that has videos of the United States military. I think as we get further out from the pandemic and start to gather again, there's just these areas that represent the military in the United States government, and that we could begin again and discuss what we're doing and combine the different techniques that we learn. Thank you. Are there other questions? Otherwise, I really would.
You see Rachel has her hand up.
Okay, Rachel, go ahead. And Rachel, you'll also be the next person.
Okay. I have a one question and one request to Australian people. Question is about how in Australia, environmental group and anti-nuclear weapon groups are tightly connected. It seems like over here, anti-nuclear power group and anti-nuclear weapon groups are kind of clearly separated, and it's my big issue. How can we connect together? And at the United Nations, the environment group more like a different conference attenders, and anti-nuclear weapon groups are attending more like Office of Disarmament events attenders. So but when I went to Australia, the civil society groups are all intertwined. And what is the secret of such a strong unity among those two big camps in Australia? That's one question. And one request is that it would be great if we could organize and form Australian chapter of Veterans for Peace. So when I communicate after this with you, Annette, I would like to send our web link, and please spread the word that we need at least 10 veterans to form a chapter. So it'd be great that we can have a much bigger relationship from now on with Australian people. I'm sure there are a lot of atomic veterans who worked at the nuclear test site conducted by UK. So I would like to connect. It would be great if we could connect with those people. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
I think there is an Australian chapter of Veterans for Peace. At least there's a Facebook that's up for them. Yeah.
Oh, great. That's nice to know.
Yeah, we haven't been able to connect with any from that group as far as I know. But yeah, no, very interested, Rachel, in what you're saying, and certainly linking it to the veterans of the atomic tests in Australia, those that are still with us, would be a worthwhile exercise, I would think.
And the other question was how, I think, Rachel, the basic question is how do you all get organizations to work together in similar areas?
Oh, that wasn't the basic question.
I think there's sort of the unity of the environment groups and the anti-nuclear groups. What's interesting in Australia is we have had a very strong push for a very long time against nuclear power. And that has involved environment groups, but also the anti-nuclear weapons groups, because we do have one small research reactor in Sydney. But I think that we've probably got together over nuclear power, and then that's spilled into nuclear weapons rather than vice versa. And I think the fact that we haven't got nuclear power here, and the fact that nuclear power is now so prohibitively expensive and so slow, it's no solution for climate change, even though there's quite a push in Australia still over small modular reactors and trying to get small modular reactors into the Australian working space. But I think it's probably they united over nuclear power, and then that's spilled into the anti-weapons space rather than vice versa.
Thank you.
Susan, Tom had his hand up. Tom Gogan.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up more on that environmental piece because, for example, here, there has been the rise of the demand for a Green New Deal, which could create a solution that gets us past the quandary of, especially in the rural districts where military production jobs are huge, the best paying jobs in those areas, as are the jobs in the prison industrial complex, also mainly in rural areas. And the Green New Deal potentially, could create jobs that would be very good paying jobs that would help to, give us a completely different paradigm of development instead of the military paradigm of development, which has been the industrial strategy as well as the foreign policy strategy of the United States, and I gather of other countries that are in this Anglo-American alliance, or Anglo-Euro-American, whatever it is. So I'm wondering if there's something similar brewing in Australia, that where the Green New Deal might become a place where we could finally get out of our silos and combine movements.
Increasingly, there is a push from the ALP and from the Greens to focus on renewable energy as a huge source of jobs in the future. Again, there's still a subtext run by the Conservatives and by the Murdoch media that nuclear power should be part of that Green New Deal. And we're really gearing up to fight that as well, because that's not, as I said, it's too slow, it's too expensive, not to mention the toxicities and the risks and the weapons proliferation. So yes, I think the Green New Deal is getting a little bit of ground here, but we have a very conservative media landscape and a very slippery media savvy federal government that seems to be able to control the narrative to a large extent.
I'll just add very quickly that far from implementing a kind of renewable energy future, the Australian government has committed to a gas-led recovery out of the COVID pandemic. That's its plan for boosting the Australian economy. It's a further exploration and export of gas. So yeah, unfortunately, we've got a lot of progress to do here in Australia.
Thank you. There are other comments or questions? Again, please stay with us because we're going to move into our agenda and a meeting that Rachel has also helped us organize for next Wednesday. Rachel, would you talk about the joint Yamanashi Peace Committee and VFP Chapter 34 meeting? So please stay with us and join us next week. Rachel. I think you're on mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So Yamanashi Prefecture is located at the central part of Japan, where they have beautiful Mount Fuji. Unfortunately, at the bottom of Mount Fuji is a live ammunition range. And then I have to mention about Okinawa here, sorry. But Okinawa is the southern small archipelago of the in Japan, and it's very, very close to Taiwan. Historically, it's been independent kingdom for 450 years, had a very good peaceful relationship with China. Then at a certain point, it was invaded by Satsuma ward of Japan during the Edo era, from which it started to be occupied by Japan. And during the World War II, it became only a battlefield in Japan. And it was started like April and ended June 23rd, which is next Wednesday. Right, June 23rd of Japan is June 22nd of United States. So on that day, we're gonna have some first gathering together with the Yamanashi chapter of Japan Peace Committee. Japan Peace Committee is one of the oldest peace organizations in Japan, which started right after the World War II. And what they're doing is they've been monitoring joint exercise operated by the US military, US Marine Corps, and Japan Self-Defense Forces. The reason why they started to monitor is actually there was a huge complaint from Okinawan people that the US military, Marine Corps practices live ammunition across the highway. So the regular cars are passing by and they're shooting their live ammunition. This is crazy, crazy exercise. So in order to reduce their burden, they started to shift some of the critical trainings to other parts of Japan. So 5 exercise ranges in mainland accepted some of the Okinawan programs, and the Yamanashi is one of them. And actually the scale and also types of weapons that they use in Yamanashi areas are far more expanded than what they used to do in Okinawa. So I was approached by one of their representatives if there's any way that we can do something about it. And I consulted with my seniors of Veterans for Peace, and we suggested, why don't we have a webinar? And that's how we decided to do our meeting. That will be next week. So there will be some representatives of Yamanashi side and Shizuoka Prefecture as well, because they're both, Mount Fuji is encompassing Yamanashi Prefecture and Shizuoka Prefecture. And there'll be also video speech by a representative from Okinawa too. And we're gonna have guest speakers from VFP side, Matt Ho, who is a former Marine Corps and also U.S. diplomat. He used to work for Department of, I'm sorry, how do you call it?
State Department.
Thank you, State Department, same as where Anne was. And so he was, as a Marine Corps veteran, he was also, he had an experience of being deployed to Yamanashi practice. So, and also we're going to have Ken Mayers. He was also stationed in Okinawa for a while as a Marine Corps. We also have some other seniors, including Anne Wright, Bruce Gagnon, who is the expert of militarization of the space, outer space. And so we'd like to have a more in-depth conversation between Japan and the US. And I will be interpreting between English and Japanese. Thank you. Did I say everything?
I think you did. What I would like to do is make sure that we get the Zoom link out to our guest tonight.
Okay, it was, okay, it will be provided by Japan. So,
okay, we'll figure it out.
Yes, well, it will be sent to later. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Are there any questions? Okay, we'll move on again to the regular business tonight. Tom, you want to give a report on the Move the Money campaign?
Honestly, there's not a tremendous amount to report this last few weeks, other than to say that we did, through the efforts of Tarak and Sul, Bob, and myself, we did get a 4-part questionnaire published in the current issue of the Independent. Thank you, Ellen. The Independent also did do a very nice video of Brendan Fay speaking at our Move the Money rally, May 17th. That's actually a misstatement. It was Idanis Rodriguez's press conference. It wasn't the press conference we asked him to do. We wanted him to do a press conference with the public advocate, Jumani Williams. And so we were quite disappointed that he did not honor what we thought was his commitment to work a joint press conference where we would be present and speaking as well. We did speak. We did issue a statement, which very nicely, the people from War Resisters League invited us to come up to, and we had planned to come up anyway, to the tax day protest on May 17th. And so we were able to read the statement, which actually I'm not sure I have thought to share with Veterans for Peace. And would like to get some feedback on that. A number of us worked on it, although I did draft it. Anyway, with the mayoral and I should say with the June 22nd elections here in New York, it seems that pretty much all the political oxygen in the room has been sucked up by that. And so we'll figure it out at the end of the month where we go from here. We are stalled at the city council with just 2-3 votes short of a slim majority at the city council in favor of the Move the Money resolution. But the news about the anti-nuclear resolution possibly moving along is good news. So good work, Anthony.
Thank you, Tom.
I'm just going to share for a second so people can see the ad.
Great. Thank you.
This was the ad that we put into the Indy just for people to see. So.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign. Representative Barbara Lee introduced the legislation to the House May 25th of this year. It's HR 3518. We now have about 4 co-sponsors. The purpose of the campaign is to remind people about the United States use of Agent Orange dioxin in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, and to demand to take care of the survivors of the spraying over Southeast Asia, to take care of the children of American service people, to take care of the Vietnamese and their children, and to clean up the land. So again, the legislation has been introduced by Representative Lee, and it's HR 3518. It's called the Victims of Agent Orange Relief Act of 2021. And for those who are interested, please take a look at the website for the campaign where we're moving. We're also put in a request for a workshop at the National Veterans for Peace Convention in August. We have a number of speakers lined up. One of them is Marjorie Cohn, who I think most of you have read her recent article about both Barbara Lee's introduction of the legislation to the House and the bill itself, and bringing it up to date on US politics. The other is Dr. Win T. Huang, who is a leading expert in the world on the birth defects that were caused by the United States use of Agent Orange in Vietnam. She'll be talking about her current and old research that she's done to pull together the scientific information that shows the correlation of birth defects with the United States use of Agent Orange. We also have Trisha Uvard, who is from the Paris Collective that supported Madame Ya's recent case against Monsanto in the Paris courts. She lost that round, but continues to work with attorneys to keep the case going on. Paul Cox and I will also be talking about the current and the old legislation and bringing it up to date. So we're working on a number of projects on Agent Orange dioxin. The next item we have on the agenda is organizing against VA privatization. I know that Veterans Healthcare Institute had a webinar yesterday or today that talked about the AIR campaign and the attempts to privatize VA services. Do we have anybody on the meeting call tonight who can update us? Okay, Peace and Planet News. Is there an update?
We are about to start work on the next print issue. We're coming back to print, and we're also in production for the second edition of the website, which will come out at the beginning of July. So moving along.
News, thank you. Is Jules here tonight to talk about the Yemen Stop Sanctions campaign?
Jules is not in the room.
Okay, are there other issues? We have a list of upcoming events. And I'm sorry, I misinformed you all. There is not a national board meeting this Saturday. The next meeting will be the following month, and we'll get that information out to everybody. I'm sorry, Nick is not here tonight to talk about Ban Killer Drones webinar. Scheduled for June 22nd.
No, Nick is also not in the room.
Thank you. The Yamanasi Peace Committee, Rachel has spoken about that. Is there anything else that we wanted to talk about this evening?
I just finished translating the response from Matt Ho into Japanese, and I forwarded the original. I think original. No, original. You don't have it yet. Okay, I'm going to forward the original to gallery members. But I was so overwhelmed by the information just by translating his responses, which is really it is super upsetting. I mean, the situation is way beyond our imagination over there. And I'm sure this is the same as anywhere in the world where they host US military bases. And I think it is very important to share the similar stories and what we can do along with the different parts of the world. Thank you for asking.
Is there any other business tonight? Okay, thank you all. Our next meeting is in 4 weeks. Any other issues, questions, concerns?
I just want to say again, great job, Rachel, in putting together that panel. That was really, they were, all the information was complimentary and it was just super. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Thank you. I must say that I must forward the same message to Annette. She was the one who coordinated Australian speakers, and without her, I couldn't do it. And I was just, you know, I was just doing this and that. That's all. Thank you.
Coordinating, Rachel. Thank you. It's a wonderful.
Julie's raising her hand.
Oh, thank you. Look, I'm sorry I came in really late. I couldn't get connected here in Australia, but for some reason, but a message came through and I got in near the end. But thank you all for all working in this brave new world of ours. It's crazy, isn't it? But surely everyone will wake up and rise up, put an end to this military madness. That's all I want. I just want to say apology and thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
And we will send out a link to the recording so you can see.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's what I was asking on the end of the email I sent about 8:30 in the morning. Yeah.
It will be sent out.
Thank you, Ellen. Yep. All right, well, I might leave you because I think the other Australians have all gone and maybe this was a private meeting, but I had a couple of phone calls as well. And anyway,
we're very happy you joined us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Julie. Thank you.
Any last minute thoughts? I see Bob Kyleback raising his hand. Go ahead, Bob.
I just said good night.
Oh, right. Good night and good luck.
Thank you, Susan and Rachel and Annette and everybody.
Yes.
What a great presentation. Thank you.
It was. Thank you all. Good night.